if there's not a veterinarian to take that cat to say what caused this injury to the cat, is this related to the case I'm working? It goes nowhere. And in many cases, even the assault on a person may be of less consequence than a felony abuse case where an animal's killed.
Hey everyone! Thanks for joining me. This episode is sponsored by Victim to Verdict and features 4 fantastic speakers. And let me tell you, I was so impressed because despite there being 4 speakers, they did such a phenomenal job of just kind of sharing the load, answering each of these questions and getting the information out there. And I really think the end result is something that's going to be a really helpful, just a really informative episode. So, as you can maybe tell from the title, we cover some pretty heavy topics in this episode, particularly with respect to animal abuse and neglect cases, and our role as veterinary professionals in addressing these cases, whether we're considered mandatory reporters in our state or permissive reporters. And along those lines, if you don't know if you're a mandatory reporter in your state, there's also some great information on how to find that out and what being a mandatory reporter really means. Talking to this group was very reassuring. I felt like they gave me the opportunity to ask questions from, a bit of a vulnerable place, thinking, I understand the importance of reporting these cases if we suspect neglect or abuse. We certainly cover the link between animal and human abuse, but in reality, it doesn't make it any less scary making that phone call and saying, hey, I think we have a problem here. At least from my perspective, it doesn't. But this group answered my questions from just a very factual, very reassuring place that not only emphasized the importance of reporting cases like this if we suspect them, but they also reminded me that even if, we might not feel like it, we might be carrying around this level of self-doubt and imposter syndrome, if anyone out there can relate to that. As veterinary professionals, we really are the experts in animal health, and we can answer a lot of these questions. All right, like I said, I've got 4 speakers to introduce here, so I'm going to stop my thoughts there and introduce them so we can get into it. Dr. Chris Ottoman has over 35 years of experience in veterinary operations, 15 of those spent leading medical operations and humane investigations within a large progressive shelter and the veterinary teaching program at the Shelter for Oregon State University. Dr. Ottoman is a charter member of the International Veterinary Forensic Sciences Association and currently serves as the president-elect. She also serves on the APA Animal Cruelty Advisory Committee and consults for the Animal Legal Defense Fund on animal cruelty investigation cases. She's contributed to hundreds of animal cruelty investigations and is passionate about the importance of veterinary contribution to this work. Our next guest was Linda Fielder. Linda has been active in the animal welfare and sheltering field for over 25 years in many capacities, including Director of Shelter Medicine, Director of Humane Law Enforcement, and in her current role as Humane Investigations Manager within the Animal Legal Defense Fund's Criminal Justice Program. She's currently coordinating the launch of the ALDF's Collaborative Response Project, which puts into practice many of the concepts that we talk about here. Our next guest was Emily Lewis. Emily is the co-author of the textbook Animal Cruelty Investigations, a collaborative response from victim to verdict, and co-creator of the online course Victim to Verdict, the veterinarian's role in animal cruelty investigations. She currently serves on the board of the International Veterinary Forensic Sciences Association and the National Sheriff's Association's Animal Cruelty Committee. She holds a JD and Master of Studies in Environmental Law from Vermont Law School, where she graduated with honors. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Ann Markham. Dr. Markham is a small animal veterinarian. She graduated from Auburn University College of Veterinary Medicine in May of 2021, and afterward began her career as an emergency veterinarian and general practitioner. In early 2023, Dr. Markham joined the authors of Victim to Verdict to provide a fresh perspective as a recent graduate, as well as serve as their content editor and project manager, among many other roles. She's still new to veterinary forensics, but is passionate about becoming more involved in the field. All right, like I said, even though we had 4 people answering these questions, I was so impressed with their ability to kind of rotate through these answers and get the information out there in such an easy to understand and impactful way. So let's go ahead and get into it.
Looking to protect your canine patients against parasites? Look no further than Simparica Trio, Serolaner, Moxidectin, and Pyrantel chewable tablets. The first chewable to offer triple protection from heartworm disease, ticks and fleas, and roundworms and hookworms. It's also FDA approved to block infections that may cause Lyme disease by killing deer ticks.
Use with caution in dogs with a history of seizures. Serolaner belongs to the isoxazoline class, which has been associated with neurologic adverse reactions. The most common side effects were vomiting and diarrhea.
Visit SimparicaTrioDVM.com for full prescribing information.
Well, welcome back, everybody. For this episode, I'm joined by several different speakers, and we're going to talk about animal cruelty cases and some of the information around reporting and how to make it a little bit less scary if you're like me and that sounds a little intimidating. So before we jump into all of that, I want to thank everybody for joining me and ask if we could just do a quick round of intros just to let everybody know who you are and what your role is. Let's start first with Dr. Chris Ottoman.
Hi, thank you. We're so glad to be here. I'm here with my team from Victim to Verdict today, which is an organization that we founded specifically to help with education to our profession, the veterinary profession, about animal cruelty investigations. I've had a long mixed career, everything from mixed animal practice to corporate practice, shelter medicine, and then really became deeply engaged in educating and working on the collaboration that's so important in animal cruelty investigations. So we're happy to be here today and excited to help share information that, like Dr. Cassi said, will hopefully familiarize everyone with the steps and processes that make this work, this important work, a little less scary or intimidating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. We also are joined by Emily Lewis.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Emily Lewis. I'm one of the co-founders of Victim to Verdict and also a managing attorney in the Animal Legal Defense Fund's Criminal Justice Program. And I am here to help make the legal process in animal cruelty investigations less of a mystery, help provide you with the tools that will give you the confidence to interface with the other professionals who are investigating and responding to animal cruelty in your community.
Absolutely. Also, Linda Fielder.
Hi, thank you. I'm Linda Fielder, and I am the Animal Cruelty Investigations Manager with the Animal Legal Defense Fund. And in that role, I consult with law enforcement, prosecutors, and veterinarians on veterinary forensics and really all aspects of animal cruelty investigations. I'm also one of the founding partners of Victim to Verdict.
That sounds so interesting and so intense, and I'm excited that we're going to learn more about that. All of it does. And then last but not least, Dr. Annie Markham.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Dr. Annie Markham. I'm a small animal veterinarian. I joined Victim to Verdict in early 2023 to be the project manager and also to provide a fresh perspective from the recent veterinary school graduate as we were making our course. So
very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you to everyone for being here today. We've referenced Victim to Verdict several times now. So can you tell us a little bit more about Victim to Verdict and how the team kind of came together?
I'll jump in here. I think everybody has a little perspective on this and hopefully we'll, share some thoughts. But really, throughout my career as a veterinarian, I really have understood the importance of collaboration, whether you're in your clinical team, your community team, but really this work in animal cruelty investigations. And for about 15 years, Linda and Emily and I worked together on animal cruelty investigations. And my first week on the job, my first case, out with law enforcement, animal control, all the parties involved, it became crystal clear to me that everybody has a really important role, and that if we aren't collaborating, we can't help the animals, we can't help the people or the community. And so as we work together on these cases, we realize that there's a process that we go through all the way from the potential victim of the cruelty or neglect, abuse, all the way to a possible adjudication of a case where we have a verdict. There's lots of steps in between, and not all cases go to court. But what we really realized and what we wanted to crystallize is the importance of everybody's role, how to work together, and particularly the veterinary profession's important role, because this is not something that we typically are trained for in vet school or think about every day in practice. I know I certainly didn't. And so we came together as a team. We formed this little company, this little partnership called Victim to Verdict, and we published a book called Victim to Verdict, a collaborative approach to animal cruelty investigations in 22. And then we've taken that and built a course with Oregon State University. And so we're doing lots of training and webinars and newsletters, emails, things like that. So that's a little bit about kind of why we did this in terms of the perspective. And I'm really proud of this team because we do have all the different perspectives, really, and you'll hear more about that. So
wonderful. Thank you. I feel like this is a good example of, kind of knowledge is power. Because like I mentioned before, I find the process of dealing with potential animal cruelty very intimidating. And I think probably a lot of that comes from, inexperience, not knowing what to expect, not knowing how to approach things correctly. And so I think, it's fantastic, the book that you put out, the course that you're teaching, to help us get more comfortable, because, as we'll illustrate, the importance here of making sure that if we suspect animal cruelty, that we're doing something about that, we're getting involved. That's kind of my personal take, my personal perspective. But what are you hearing in general from veterinarians when it comes to animal cruelty suspicions and investigations? I'm sure my perspective is not, wholly representative of everyone out there.
I think it's interesting because as veterinarians in community practice, you get used to providing diagnosis and treatment plans to clients, or you talk to a specialist about a case that you're having a hard time with, and you talk about your opinion on the case and what you think the treatment plan might be. But what we've learned over time, when veterinarians are faced with the thought of having that opinion go toward a prosecution of an individual or charging for a crime, then they become, they begin to second guess themselves as experts. And, that's one of the things that our course really tries to tackle throughout the modules that we present. And that is, remember that as a DVM, you are an expert. And, we're not asking you to be the foremost expert in starvation in animals. We're asking you to use your training and experience to give, an account of what you saw and what may have been done to prevent that injury. And so, building confidence, veterinarians are already equipped with the knowledge that they need to do this work. And so we're just trying to enforce, the confidence and take some of the mystery out of the process.
That makes a lot of sense. Can I give you an example of one area where, I love the way you put that, of we have the knowledge, we have the training, and we're not being asked to, we're just being asked to give our clinical opinion here. I saw a wound yesterday that, in my opinion, it looked like it had been there for several days at least, if not a little bit longer. And it was a team member who asked me, like, how long do you think that's been there? And all of a sudden I felt like, I said, we're not talking about, we're not spreading this like Dr. Fleming said it's been here this long, because I don't know. But I felt like my mind just went blank. And before anybody asked me, I was like, that thing's been there a while. Like, it does not look very good. And as soon as somebody asked me to make a definitive statement, I felt like I clammed up. So does that kind of represent some of what you're trying to help with? Like, that made me feel like, how could I be an expert on this? I don't know. It's just what I think.
That's exactly it. That's a really great representation of just exactly how veterinarians feel when they think that their opinion might go on the record, so to speak.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like you just start to think about anything as a veterinarian in your head and you feel confident. And then as soon as you have to put it into words or write it down and you think someone might look at your record or ask you about it, then that little voice starts to say, well, wait, do I really know? And so as Linda's saying, we just really want to help build that confidence and bring everybody back to, yes, you do know. And this isn't an exact science. Vet medicine is not exact. And we're not saying you don't want to be assured and truthful and accurate, but the confidence is huge, and the expertise is there.
Yeah, and I would just add, thinking back to why you had that initial response to begin with, that the wound looked old, because your initial thought is going to be based on your training and experience, and then dialing into why you knew that. And that's what makes your opinion matter, and it's what makes you the expert.
Speaking also too from the recent graduate, I think the way we're trained is you're answering to the ivory tower most of the time, and they want that specific data that you have behind your answer. And while that's, has its purpose, I think we need to remember that most of the time when we're answering questions, it's for people that are either laypersons or, not these people that are really digging into everything you're saying. And so like everyone was saying, you already are the expert. You already know so much more than you think you do.
And that's why we need you guys to remind us of that. It's funny, my sister is a physician and I'm a veterinarian, and she is an internist. I'm obviously a generalist, but I really enjoy the internal med workups, and we kind of joke with each other. We're like, we've made great careers over constantly questioning ourselves.
Yeah. And I love your example of the wound, and it really gets me thinking that one thing to keep in mind for everybody who's trying to learn this field is that the question is not how old is it? It's specifically, it is, hey, did this just happen in the last day or so? Or is it likely, based on all these things we see physically, this is days or weeks or months old? Really applies to a wound. We see this all the time in starvation. I don't really know exactly how long it took that dog to become, a body condition score of 1. Well, you do know that it was weeks or months, correct? We don't need to know the number of days, but we need to know this was long-term neglect, long-term lack of calories and proper nutrition. So just being able to think in that context of what is the importance to the answer to the question? How specific does it have to be is something I try to constantly remind myself of.
And I think I'm kind of hearing the answer to my next question form here. You guys are giving great examples, because my next question was going to be, how does Victim to Verdict help veterinarians in this capacity, and kind of the resources provided when we're faced with needing to give an opinion on a cruelty case? And I think this has been a great example here, because, I think you've given me my confidence back to say, well, yeah, I looked at it and these were all the reasons I knew it didn't happen yesterday.
Right. I'm sure we'll talk about this more, but the course starts with providing the veterinarian just kind of an overview of how the criminal justice system works in a nutshell. So again, we're taking some of the unknown away, because then you're learning what to expect from an investigation, from, the initial report through to the court trial. We also teach the basics of a forensic examination, whether that's on a live animal or a forensic necropsy. And then to kind of go back to your example of the wound, aging a wound, we help teach and encourage veterinarians to speak in their reports for investigation cases the same way you would speak to a client. So in the case of your wound, you would be descriptive in the way that you would illustrate your findings. So I could see that the margins were granulated. There was an odor. You're using your 5 senses. You're writing that description, because what you're doing in your role is educating the investigator or law enforcement who's going to read your report and then say, okay, yeah, I knew there was a wound. Now I know that that wound had been there for a while. And then you're educating the prosecutor who's going to read your report and say, okay, I know now that that was a condition that was left untreated for a period of time. So that is in line with the statute that requires, prompt veterinary treatment, or whatever the statute is in that state.
Absolutely. I feel like it's just reminding us to use our doctor words, because when you're like the edges were granulated and I was like, I don't know, it was kind of like dark and thick and all and all this. And just to clarify, this was not a wound like in a context of a concern for an animal cruelty case or anything like that. We were treating it differently, but yeah, it's even just like what you said there. I was like, oh yeah, I do know those words and what that means. But in that moment when somebody puts you on the spot, it's hard to kind of feel that confidence that you can give those opinions. And it sounds like that's what Victim to Verdict is doing, is kind of putting that confidence back in veterinarians' hands. What can we do in clinical practice if we do suspect animal cruelty? Like, how can we, despite our obvious self-doubt or my obvious self-doubt, how can we be the expert in that moment? How can we function as the expert in that moment? Even if we don't feel like the expert, what can we do to really try to make sure we're being thorough and doing a good job?
The first thing I would say that you can do is have the procedures in place so that when you are confronted with that situation, you aren't having to figure out what to do in that moment, because there's probably a lot going on in that moment that you're taking in and your staff is taking in. And so having a plan for when that comes up in your clinic is the first step for sure. And you mentioned resources that we provide through our book and our course, and there's so many resources in there to have templates and forms and policies and procedures, all those things, so you don't have to start from scratch with that. We also are just a resource ourselves for anyone who takes the course or reads the book, so that you're not feeling like you have to go through something like that alone the first time you're encountered with it. But I think, like Linda was saying, just really tap into your expertise. And as the lawyer, I'm always preaching documentation, always write everything down in as detail as you can. And all of that is going to be what's so useful to the investigator and anyone else that becomes involved in that situation. And so few cases are going to really go the full route to a prosecutor, to trial. You're the first step in just calling out something that might be going on with the welfare of this animal, and that's your first and foremost duty. And then involving the individuals who can help collaborate to resolve that issue in whichever way is the most appropriate.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I love the emphasis on the documentation. That can be the hardest part sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. And, Dr. Cassi, I think when you asked, what do we do if we suspect? The thing about these cases is they generally come in kind of two ways, I think. One is somebody approaches you as a clinician, an investigator, law enforcement, somebody from a local agency, and says, hey, I think I may have a case, or I know I have a case. Would you be willing to help? Would you? And then you step right into your traditional veterinary role of examining, documenting, like Emily was saying, and using your expertise to help that individual determine the extent of injury, if there was an injury, how you think it may have happened. So that's kind of that one big bucket of how we get these cases and how we see community practices becoming involved. The other way is they walk by us unexpectedly in practice. They come through the door when we're not expecting it, right? And we're busy, we're doing a million things. You've got all your internal medicine cases, and then suddenly you have this dog and you're thinking, this looks really skinny and it doesn't have any metabolic or neoplastic or other reasons to look like this. And that's when those cases require sort of that veterinary radar, is what we call it, where you think this might be something. And so then you just follow that same pathway, documentation, asking questions, and then knowing who to contact if you think this should be reported. So in the instance of a starvation case, somebody surprisingly may present these to a veterinarian at the very end of that animal's life with no reason other than hasn't been fed. And so then you're stepping into calling somebody to say, hey, I think I have a case here and here's my documentation. Where do we go from here, and get that local help? So I like to sort of boil it into those two groups, because I think that helps us crystallize how this might happen. And, the other thing in that second group that we see in clinical practice is the story just doesn't match the history, or the findings, excuse me. So client comes in, they say the cat was injured when I was bathing it. and you, as a clinician, you look and you say, fractured jaw, fractured ribs, unlikely to happen bathing a cat. Probably in bathing a cat more, the bather would be injured than the cat.
And why were you
right?
bathing the cat to begin with?
Right. But this is amazing to me that I can think of a handful of these cases over the years where that was the story. And then as a clinician, you think, okay, that story does not match my physical findings on this animal. And so in those cases, you may find some non-accidental, even repetitive injury to the animal. And again, it's, asking the questions, documenting, and not even necessarily asking the questions to the client. Certainly you are going to ask some of those, but providing questions to the investigator that help them know what pathway to go down in terms of, now, wait, when were you doing this bath and what was happening and who was there and how many times have you done this? And then suddenly we know in some cases that is an animal abuse case.
It breaks my heart to know that you've seen a handful of cases like that because, I think of if you try to do anything to a cat that the cat does not want you to do, it's very difficult. And exactly what you said, like usually you're the one that gets injured, not the cat. And they grow 8 legs and they climb your face, and that's that. And so, yeah, that's why I guess I say it breaks my heart to hear that, because I'm going, what would you have had to do to that cat to get them into that position? And hearing your story in this context, my brain says no, like that doesn't fit the history of what you're telling me. And I think you're doing a great job of illustrating, kind of bringing it full circle here of how I could see myself in that moment going, well, I don't know, like I don't want to accuse somebody of something, like maybe there's something I'm not accounting for here. But when we really sit here and talk about it outside of that kind of gut squeeze moment, then it becomes very clear that it's very unlikely that that's what actually happened.
And I think that could be kind of a good segue into, traumatic injury, non-accidental injury cases with animals and how often they are linked to domestic violence or violence within the home, child abuse or elder abuse. And if we use the cat bathing example as, to illustrate that, you're thinking about, what would a reasonable person do when they're bathing their cat and it starts to scratch them. But when you're talking about someone who has a history of domestic violence or anger issues or harming others, and they bathe the cat and the cat scratches them, their reaction might be, to grab the cat by the neck and slam it against the wall. And so, when you see these cases come in, oftentimes they are presented by the partner or the spouse or someone else in the family who was not the abuser themselves. They may have an idea of what was going on, but they may not be willing to share that with you. And so being sensitive to the fact that animal crimes often coincide with human violence or domestic violence is really one of our driving reasons for doing this work, not just to protect the animals, but to protect human victims in these cases as well.
Man, this is some heavy stuff that you're involved in every day. Like that's hard to face on a regular basis, that, there's things like this that are happening.
Yeah. And without the veterinarian's voice and expertise to help law enforcement or the investigator figure this out, it goes nowhere. So, you have a domestic abuse situation and the investigator goes into the apartment and looks around and takes the suspect into custody and suddenly notices he's all scratched up or she's all scratched up. In this case, he's all scratched up. And the investigator can say, what happened? Well, the cat scratched me. Okay, I'll go back and look for the cat. Finds the injured or deceased cat. If there's not a veterinarian to take that cat to say what caused this injury to the cat, is this related to the case I'm working? It goes nowhere. And in many cases, even the assault on a person may be of less consequence than a felony abuse case where an animal's killed. So like Linda's saying, it's all connected. It is heavy work, but the voice for the victim animal and for the human involved in this linked crime is so important. And it doesn't surface without our veterinary expertise. So yeah, we're all passionate about helping make it easier for our profession.
And of course, in some states, we're mandatory reporters, where if we have a suspicion, then we're obligated to report. And you've done a wonderful job of illustrating how, even if we're not mandatory reporters, how important it is to do it. But how do we find out if in our state, we as veterinarians are mandatory reporters, and what does that mean?
Yeah, in fact, in 22 states, you are mandatory reporters. And a good resource to figure out what the law is for you in your state is the Animal Legal Defense Fund's website. They publish a rankings report every year that's updated with the laws for each state, and it ranks each state's animal protection laws. So you can see where your state falls as far as strong laws or weak laws. But it also has an interactive map that shows which states have veterinary reporting requirements and which of those are mandatory and which of those are permissive. And when I say mandatory and permissive, the difference there is that if you live in a state where you have a mandatory reporting law, your law says you shall report this type of animal crime. That means you don't have a choice. You are required by law to report if you have a good faith belief that that crime is occurring. It doesn't mean you have to know for certain. It just means you can point to things that told you that you think this is going on here. Permissive states mean that they encourage you to report as a veterinarian, and if you choose to do so, you're supported by your state statute saying you may report that. States also will provide civil and criminal immunity for veterinarians who are reporting, both in the mandatory states and in the permissive states. So in total, 42 states either have mandatory or permissive reporting laws. It's been a legislative trend for many years now. It really has become commonplace and encouraged for veterinarians to report this conduct.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you clarified that, because I'm sure it is one of those things that they went over with us in school, but there's so much that we go over in school, and laws change. So it's good to know that the Animal Legal Defense Fund is a good, reliable resource to check and see what your role is, or what the laws in your state are regarding reporting. Kind of along the same lines of legal obligations and protections. If we have an animal, say for example, this cat with injuries that are not consistent with, bathing the cat, can we hold that animal if we suspect that there's abuse involved?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one that we hear a lot from veterinarians who are concerned about their patients. And Dr. Ottoman might have some insight here as well about how to deal with that in the moment. But from my legal perspective, you can't really hold on to an animal. They're still considered property under the law throughout the country. And so you can't really withhold someone's property from them. But there are things you can do if you suspect abuse, intentional abuse, like you're talking about here. You can call law enforcement while those people are still there at your clinic, while you still have the animal. If law enforcement comes out and views the animal, here's what your findings are, they can take some legal action to seize that animal, taken into protective custody at that time. You can also, if you have worked it out with your clinic, that you can offer additional treatment for things like radiographs or some sort of overnight hospitalization for whatever reason, whatever good legitimate reason. Then sometimes being able to offer those things at a reduced cost or no cost gives you additional time to report to law enforcement and have them intervene. But if someone is asking for their animal back, it does put you in a bad position. You don't want to be withholding that animal from them.
I think that's great information that Emily provided. And the only thing I would add is that this is something we really want to help with by providing policies and procedures or forms and readiness for the veterinary clinic. So in that example of the cat, you're just thinking this just doesn't seem right. And you've got the cat back in the treatment room, and you can't hold the cat, but you can grab your evidence placard, you can shoot some photos, you can do some extra documentation, you can fill out a forensic physical exam form that will help you remember some of the extra documentation. And so then you've done some of the basic communication and the basic documentation that you need if you're not able to hold the animal. Then you call it in and let the investigator take it from there. Go to the address, potentially pick up the animal. But I think the tactic of offering additional services is also super helpful, just so you can stall a little bit, figure out what's going on, and get some of the basics written down.
And I would also just add that when you're talking to law enforcement in that situation, if it's a serious case, you know, you can convey to them, I'm a veterinarian, this is what I'm seeing, it's a urgent situation. Really convey that sense of emergency or time sensitive to the situation, and they're going to take you seriously.
That's good to know. And I agree. I love the idea of offering extra services at a reduced rate to buy some time, and also to know that those resources are available through victim to verdict. So, you know, if we are having that moment of like, okay, what do I write down? What do I look for? How do I document this? You know, we have those resources readily available and can use them. You know, again, I think such great information here in terms of, you know, why it's so important to report, what things to look for, how to document that, steps to take, what our legal obligations are. There's always that nagging doubt I want to circle back around to, because as we're talking about this, you know, it makes so much sense. Yes, we absolutely want to get these animals out of a bad situation. But I know for me, I think of, you know, okay, well, now the police are showing up at this person's door, and I think they're going to have a pretty strong suspicion of who sent them there. And I go back to that clammy place of what if I'm wrong? Because, you know, while the law can certainly provide us with, you know, immunity from, you know, prosecution, they're like, can they provide us the backlash immunity of somebody showing up at our clinic, or, you know, the social media tirades and things like that? I guess, what would you say to veterinarians who maybe have that, you know, that pit in their stomach of like, they're going to know I'm the one that sent law enforcement there, and what if I'm wrong? What if I didn't read the situation correctly?
Oh, we probably all have something really good to say.
To really answer that, we could start by separating the types of cases that you're going to see into a couple of categories. The first category would be neglect, meaning there was an omission of some type of care, whether it was food and water, as simple as food and water or shelter, or whether it was veterinary care for an illness or injury that was prolonged and chronic. A lot of times when particularly animal services, animal control, or a humane society investigator responds to a report like that, they're not going to go in with the intention to cite that person with a crime. They're going to go in with the intention to educate and help find resources to aid that individual in caring for their animal and keeping it in the home, if that's the appropriate thing to do. And so, you know, 80–90% of what enforcement agencies do in the field with animals and their owners is educate and facilitate proper care. So if you feel the need to, the education part of that on a neglect case can start in your exam room. And so, you know, the scenario that you mentioned with the wound, you know, if that was on a 12-year-old Lhasa Apso and it was under the armpit, and, you know, the owner is 75 and hasn't seen the belly of that dog in 4 months, you know, it's understandable that the negligence was born from a lack of education or ability to recognize. And so in a case like that, it could be that your education and intervention is really what was needed in that case. In more complicated neglect cases like animal hoarding scenarios, that veterinarians tell us often that they are confronted with those cases in their clinic. The chances that the veterinarian alone is going to be able to intervene and educate in a way that's going to make a difference for that person and those animals is very low. So in a case like that, you want to collaborate with law enforcement and humane society so that they can view the home, they can see what kind of environment the animals and the person are being subjected to, and they can start to intervene, whether that's something that goes down a criminal path or just resources to get things under control and get that person into a position where they can properly care for their animals. When you have a abuse case, so a non-accidental injury or trauma, And I think those are the ones that veterinarians are the most nervous about. Is this person going to show up on my doorstep the next day, mad that I turned them in? And it's often, like you said, fairly obvious who that report came from. One thing a lot of veterinarians do is, inform the client in the room. I am a mandatory reporter of this. This is what I think I'm seeing. I just want you to know that I'm required by law, by the state statute, to call this in. And so at least, you're giving them time to absorb that information. I've never heard of an adverse event. I mean, we work with veterinarians all over the country, and I've never heard of anyone being stalked or threatened or harmed as a result of reporting. So while it does seem like a reasonable concern, I just don't have any personal experience with that ever happening to anyone.
Dr. Cassi, you said you ask yourself, what if I'm wrong? But then I think it's also fair to ask yourself, what if you're not wrong? And what does that mean?
I think it's a really good point, and you both did such a good job of painting, that really powerful picture of, like you said, in the terms of abuse. What if I'm not wrong and there's additional abuse that's happening here that we, because we've talked about the link and everything like that, but to human abuse. And then also, I really liked what you said, Linda, about, say a hoarding situation or something along those lines. It hit home with me when you said there's nothing you as a veterinarian are probably going to be able to do by yourself for those animals. You really need help. You need someone else involved. And I've seen a couple of those hoarding cases, the aftermath of them, and absolutely right. So, gosh, I mean, this has been just such a great talk. I'm so thankful that all of you were willing to join me and go over all of this information, because it helps to have that reminder of how important it is, and to know that there are resources out there to make what can seem like kind of a scary process much more manageable, to know what to expect, and help remove that fear of the unknown. So I just want to thank all of you from the bottom of my heart for coming on the podcast. Are there any final thoughts anyone wants to share?
Thank you for having us, and thank you to everybody. We hope a lot of people listen and reach out to us for ideas, tips, tricks in getting further educated in this field, whether you're just starting or you've done many cases. And don't forget, as a veterinarian, we are seen as the superheroes and the advocates and the voice for the animals that we take care of. And we have the skills to translate between the owner or the environment or whatever happened to the animal for the animal. And no one else can do that like us. So in today's, high pressure environment where we hear a lot going on in our profession, this is a way we know we can just use what we've got to make a difference. And so to just build the confidence and, move forward to help, which is what veterinarians do all day, every day. This is just, we're hoping another tool in the toolbox. And, with that, again, thank you for having us.
Yeah, I was just going to underscore what you were saying about the work and how rewarding it can be. It is difficult work to do, but it is some of the most rewarding work that you can participate in. And for that reason alone, I would encourage you to embrace this course and this topic and learn more. And like Dr. Ottoman said, reach out to us, because the animals, they're so resilient, and it's just such a gift to be able to come to their aid and then see them come through that on the other side.
I would say that since becoming involved with Victim to Verdict, I've helped a lot of my classmates kind of become involved with this work in their practice. And I know I have one classmate that actually got quite a bit of pushback from some of her colleagues that had been in the field for longer and had reported before, and nothing happened. And I think that's, especially if you're a young veterinarian, that's a possibility. And we kind of helped her, coached her through that. And ultimately she felt a lot better about doing something, even though, you never know where it's going to go. You raise the awareness, and you tell law enforcement, and then it's in their hands. So I think doing that's better than not doing anything at all. And I think in veterinary medicine, a lot of stuff can keep you up at night that happens during the day. And I would say, not doing anything, probably would keep you up at night more so than raising the red flag.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with professionals and veterinarians about not only their role as a hero for animals, but as a hero for human victims as well of domestic violence, child abuse, elder abuse. And, just to leave you with a little bit of food for thought about that trend that we call the link, and that is the link between cruelty to animals and violent crimes against people. We know that research has proven that in 80% of interviews with human victims of domestic violence, they told their interviewer that there were animal victims in the home that were either harmed themselves or threatened in the course of the abuse events. So, that is another call to action for us and another reason why we do this work. So thank you so much for joining us and considering learning more about the work.
Absolutely. Thank you again to everyone. Such a powerful talk, and I enjoyed talking to all of you so much. So thankful for all that you do. As we're wrapping up here, do you want to just real quick remind everybody of the name of the book that you wrote and the name of your course that you host through Oregon State?
Sure. The book is called Victim to Verdict, a collaborative approach to animal cruelty investigations. You can find it by Googling it. You can also go to our website, www.victim2verdict.com, and find information there that will lead you directly to our course, which is of basically the same name, a veterinarian's role in animal cruelty investigations. It's a 6-hour race-approved continuing ed course, all 50 states for vets and vet techs. And it's asynchronous, got about 9 months to complete it, and it provides a lot of foundational information that we think is helpful to everyone. So take a look at those resources, and of course, reach out to us via the website if we can help you with any specific cases, resources, or questions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for joining me so much. It was such a good talk. Well, I hope everyone who has listened to this has taken away a good reminder of how important it is to be on the lookout for signs of animal cruelty and animal neglect, and feels empowered to take action in those circumstances. I want to say a huge thank you to the Victim to Verdict team for providing such a fantastic episode. It was wonderful to talk to all of you, and thank you for such great information. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. It'll help other veterinary professionals like you find this and other great content we try to put out there. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, click on the Education tab on the VetFolio website. As always, we'd love to hear your input on this talk, as well as ideas for topics you'd like to hear from us in the future. Feel free to reach out to me at dvm@vetfolio.com. You can also visit my Facebook page at Dr. Cassi DVM, and you can find me on LinkedIn. And remember, if one animal is better off because of you today, it's a great day.